Welcome back to One American Baseball Podcast. You are joining us for episode 41. I'm Chris, as always, joined by my co-host Jaden. And today we're going to take a bit of a step back from covering your Guardians and Reds, as quite frankly, there's not a whole lot going on in Guardians and Red country. Currently, the winter meetings are going on, though, for this entire week. It's Monday, December 8th, as we're recording this. And we're going to talk about some of the signings that have gone on around the league, and also talk about one signing for each team. We've had one recent signing since we've last checked in with you guys. So without further ado, hand it off to Jaden. How you doing today?
I'm good, Chris. I'm excited that winter meetings are finally here. That's like, as far as the baseball off season goes, it sort of goes. The World Series ends, you wait around, and then winter meetings are sort of like really when the off season starts. As far as things actually happening now. Um, I'm personally pretty excited because I'm excited to see the Schwarber domino fall. The Reds are still being linked to him somehow. I still don't remain super hopeful that it'll happen, but it's nice to, continue to hear it. At least, it means that there's some buzz where there's a smoke, there's at least a fire. So,
Yeah.
and I'll touch on that a little bit, but yeah, I'm excited. This feels like the first step to baseball being back.
Yeah, we're in the beginning of the winter meeting, so when this episode comes out, it's probably already going to be out of date. I know that last episode it was out of date when we released it because Devin Williams signed with the Mets
Yep.
uh the morning that we posted it. So the morning after we recorded the podcast. So unfortunately had a little bit of poor aging there, but we hope you still enjoy that episode. So anyway, why don't you get into your Reds for us?
Yeah, so the one free agent signing that we did happen to make this past week was we brought back Emilio Pagan. So the Pagan signing was announced the day after Devin Williams signed for 50 million plus dollars over 3 years with the Mets, and the Reds brought Pagan back at 20 million over 2 years, and I believe it's a player opt out after 2026. So um, I really like this move. I think it's a pretty good move. Last week I talked about getting Devin Williams. That's just because that was one of the rumors. And I honestly didn't know if we'd bring Pagan back. I think you know, if you'd given me a choice of the two, I probably would take Pagan over Williams, given the years they had last year. I like it a lot when you compare those salaries. You look at Devin Williams, who's getting 50 million over 3 years. Ryan Helsley is getting, I think, 28 or something over 2 years. We have it down here in the outline somewhere. Yeah, 28 million over 2 years. So the Reds are getting a guy who I think is, I mean, based on their performances in 2025, on the same level as Helsley and Williams. Now, Williams and Helsley have shown they can be a lot more elite than Emilio Pagan has shown that he can be over his career. But, if you just look at last year, you're getting a guy who was probably better than Devin Williams and Ryan Helsley for cheaper. Um, as always with the Reds, you don't really have much room for spending in the offseason. Um, and this just decreases the amount of money they have to spend. But it helps with the bullpen that definitely needed to be addressed. Um, Nick Kroll talked about the bullpen being the main thing that needed addressed this offseason, and I think they did a good job of that, bringing Emilio Pagan back. It gives us a veteran arm coming off a career year, and he's familiar with the organization, which is all good stuff. Yeah, I really like this signing. I think it works well with our bullpen because, Pagan, he can close. You just slot him back in at closer, and it allows Tony Santillan to stay in that fireman role that he played so well last year. He doesn't have to worry about closing games now. Tito has him whenever he needs him, like he did in 2025. He doesn't have to go to him to close. He doesn't have to be unavailable because he's the ninth inning guy, which I think is really nice. So I'm a really big fan of this move. I think we got Pagan at a good price point given how he performed last year. Um, and yeah, I'm glad he's back. I'm glad to see Emilio back. I hope he can give us another 30 plus save season. He is, I think, 34. He'll be 35 next season. So he's getting up there in age, which is a little concerning. But I don't know. I have no reason not to trust him. So and until he proves to me that he can't be trusted, I'm excited to have him back in Cincinnati. And then, like I said, as the winter meetings get rolling today, we're still being linked to Kyle Schwarber. It's the most I can remember the Reds ever being linked to a free agent, at least in my lifetime, that I can think of. Like the Mike Moustakas, Jeimer Candelario free agent signings were really pretty random. And the Mike Moustakas signing was the largest one in club history for a free agent, which is pretty embarrassing. Um, but it's exciting that we're still being linked to him, I guess, if nothing else. Most reports are that the Phillies remain the front runners for Kyle Schwarber, but the Reds are still in the mix. It was reported last night on December 7th that the Pirates made him an offer for 4 years and almost certainly over $100 million, whatever that wording means. The insiders can be very vague um, because they're getting fed information that probably isn't 100% concrete, and then I'm sure they try to keep it vague too. Um, One reporter, I believe it was Saturday, this was reported, said the Reds were, if he doesn't end up back in Philly, that he would sign with the Reds. I don't know, how much I believe that. These national guys just kind of say things for clicks sometimes. Um, and obviously, I keep in touch with a lot of Reds news, so I'm only going to see the headlines where it mentions the Reds basically. So there's probably some of that bias in there. Like I said, I'm not holding my breath. I wouldn't be surprised if by the time the winter meetings are over, he is still a Philadelphia Philly. I think that's probably his most likely landing spot. But it's nice to see some concrete rumors. I think the one thing I'm worried about is, let's say the Pirates make that offer and we don't even match that offer. That would be concerning to me that you're letting a NL Central rival outbid you, an NL Central rival that doesn't spend money. Like if it was the Cubs or the Cardinals, they're known to throw money around, so it wouldn't bother me so much if they outbid you for one of these free agents. But a team like the Pirates who never spends money, they're an in-division rival, and they've kind of been the laughing stock of the division, along with the Reds, to be fair, um, for the last 15 years. It would be really frustrating to me if we didn't at least match the Pirates' offer, whatever that is. Um, but I don't. I think it'll all be a moot point come the end of this week, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I can't help but think of the Shohei Ohtani to the Blue Jays debacle from
Right.
a couple years ago when I think about this Kyle Schwarber to the Reds situation. And I hope for your sake that doesn't get to that point.
Yeah, I
That
don't.
would
I don't
be
need to see him on a plane to Cincinnati just for him to end up a Philly or a Red Sox or something like that. I'd rather it get done pretty quick and painlessly.
yeah. The Blue Jays, you saw what happened to the Blue Jays though, the year after Shohei the year after that Shohei situation went down, so you never
That's
know.
true.
But they are the Blue Jays anyway. So I'll get into the Guardians signing. So the Guardians made a splash in free agency, you could say. It wasn't a big splash. It was more of you just step in a puddle and then a little bit of water comes out. But they signed Connor Brogdon for a 1 year, $900,000 deal. He was with the Angels last year. He pitched in 43 games. He put up an ERA of 5.55, which obviously that's not good at all. His WHIP was 1.34, which as a reliever, it's respectable. If you're under 1.1, that's pretty respectable. If you're sub one, that's very good. If you're a starter, a sub one whip is elite. And the best relievers in the league have like a point 0.7, a point 0.8 whip on any given year. So 1.34 is not anything. It's not great, but it's a little bit better than a 5.55 ERA. Now the Guardians, I was looking at baseball savant profile, and the Guardians love to sign guys that have good extension. And Connor Brogdon is ranked 92nd percentile in extension metrics, so that's however many feet. So his extension is 7 feet long. So basically, he's releasing the ball 53 feet from home plate instead of 60 feet 6 inches, or 53 feet 6 inches, whatever that is. Um, so a really bad extension metric would be about 6 feet. The best of the best have like 7.5 feet of extension. So he's very good at throwing the ball close to home plate, and he gets the ball about 95 to 96. He has a pitch mix of a fastball, cutter, and changeup. So he's nothing that's super overpowering. He's going to be like a long reliever or just a guy to come up and clean up a mess for the Guardians, eat some innings. So the Guardians have a good track record of getting the best out of pitchers with good extension. A good example of this is Slade Cecconi. However, Slade Cecconi is a lot younger than Connor Brogdon. Connor Brogdon is 30 years old and has 5+ years of experience in the big leagues. With Slade Cecconi, with the Guardians' recent success stories in maximizing their potential when it comes to their extension metrics, it mainly happens with guys that have a year or less of big league experience. So, Slade Cecconi last year or going into last year with Arizona, he had a 6+ ERA, and you saw what Slade Cecconi did this past season. He had a ERA in the fours, which honestly wasn't very representative of how he was for a lot of the season. He had a few real clunkers of starts, but he also had some really, really impressive starts. So Ben Lively is another success story. This is probably the most comparable. Um, uh, this is probably the closest comparison I could find in the Guardian system recently was Ben Lively. Ben Lively actually has a very similar profile and on Baseball Savant to Connor Brogdon. He kind of has the same strengths and weaknesses that Brogdon does. Ben Lively is 87th percentile in extension, so Lively only throws about 90 miles an hour, whereas Brogdon throws about 95. But Ben Lively excels a little bit more in limiting walks, which Brogdon is pretty middle of the road when it comes to walking people. Brogdon's strikeout to walk rate is about 2.7 to 1. He strikes out a little bit more than one batter per inning. So he gets a lot of whiff when it comes to his pitches, but he is a little wild sometimes. So we'll have to wait and see if the Guardians kind of bring out the best in Connor Brogdon. I could definitely see it being a decent signing, but they need to do more with the bullpen. This can't be the only thing that the Guardians do with the bullpen this year. Um, as it stands right now, the bullpen is Cade Smith, Hunter Gaddis, Tim Herron, Eric Sabrowski, and Connor Brogdon. Um, and those are for sure the guys that are on the roster at this point. Matt Festa as well. I think I forgot to say Matt Festa. So. Um, I don't feel very good about this bullpen lineup as it is right now. There are a couple people in the system, like I talked about Daniel Espino in a couple of other episodes. I think that if he stays healthy, that he could be he could be a back end of the bullpen guy by the middle of the year, but that doesn't really solve the Guardians' issues in the beginning of the year. And also they just need to get somebody else who has proven experience and who can work big situations and has a track record. So, and also, even though Kate Smith and Hunter Gaddis are super reliable, they're coming off of two consecutive 70+ appearance seasons. So they've had a really big workload. With Tim Herron, he's very inconsistent performance-wise. There were a lot of ups and downs last year. He started to look a little bit better towards the end of the season, but I hope that Tim Herron can kind of turn it around this year to that 2024 version of himself. And then Matt Festa he's decent. He's not back into the bullpen material, but he's definitely like a solid sixth inning guy. He could come into some big situations and extenuating circumstances. If the bullpen's pretty gassed, then Matt Festa can come in and fill in a role, but he can't. Festa can't be a guy that comes in on a regular basis into high leverage situations. Eric Sabrowski, I don't really like his health history, so there's just a lot of question marks in this bullpen. Um, but that's all I have as far as Connor Brogdon goes. Yeah, I don't hate the signing, but that can't be the only thing the Guardians do this offseason.
Yeah, I feel like, we've, as Reds and Guardians fans, we find ourselves saying that a lot. This can't be the only move that you make, whether it be a free agent signing in the offseason or a trade at the trade deadline. I find that you and I say this can't be the only move you're going to make a lot. And oftentimes it kind of is, which is scary. Um, but I definitely think the Guardians need some help in that bullpen. And it's kind of concerning because the like high leverage guys are starting to go, with Williams signing and Brian Helsley signing, and Pagan was drawing interest from quite a few teams, I think, as well. I know that you were pretty high on the Guardians maybe getting him,
Hmm.
but he's off the market now. I'm trying to think of who's left. I know Luke Williams is left out there. Um, Maybe Robert Suarez, I believe, is out there, but he's
Kyle
probably going to come
Finnegan.
in. Kyle
Kyle
Finnegan,
Finnegan's the guy I'm most interested in for the Guardians. I think that he's attainable.
yeah,
He's not a
I would
super
say,
high profile name like a Robert Suarez or like somebody else. I also think Luke Weaver is relatively attainable for the Guardians. So
yeah, I think Finnegan would command sort of a Pagan level contract. 2 years, right around that 20 million mark.
I think the
Um,
Guardians can manage that.
yeah, I don't think that's out of the question, but I think
Yeah.
it's up to the ownership and the front office to get that done. But yeah, that's a pretty concerning pen, um, right now, I would say, aside
Mhm.
from, obviously you know more than I do, but Cade Smith, obviously, I would feel good in, and then Hunter Gaddis, but other than that, it's a lot of question marks, like you said. So yeah, I definitely think the Guardians need to do something.
This is the same thing that I was thinking like a couple years ago before the going into the 24 season. And the
Hmm.
Guardians had one of the best bullpens that we've seen in the last decade. So
Right.
that just goes to show how fickle bullpens are. You
Yeah.
know, there are a lot of prospects that the Guardians have that can fill in the bullpen. You know, they have Austin Peterson, who has been a starter for most of his career, and I think they're going to keep him as a starter. But there are a couple of other guys that are definitely interesting that I could get into in another episode. But I did see a couple of guys in the system that have a decent shot at filling into the bullpen if the Guardians want to go more towards internal options in the bullpen and,
Right.
and focus on signing. Hopefully, I'm saying this with a lot of hope, but focus on signing a more high profile bat and designating
Yeah.
money towards that. But I think they need to just spread it out in the bullpen and in the outfield this season. So we're gonna go ahead and move on to off-season moves around the league. So first up, we have the Marcus Semien and Brandon Nimmo trade. So.
Yeah. I think we both agree that the Rangers are the winners of this trade. Um, I don't know. The Mets are a franchise that they're kind of a joke because of how much money they're willing to spend and these moves that they're willing to make, and it never really seems to work for them. And I think this is going to be another example of that. Marcus Semien is going into his year 35 season. He had a 97 OPS plus last year, so about a league average bat. Obviously, he's capable of more than that at the plate, but he is getting older, so you wonder if there's just the natural decline there. He provided good value as a base runner and a defender last year, though, which are both good things. Will probably play. I mean, he'd have to play second base for the Mets, and Luis Angel Acuna was holding it down for them most of last year, if I remember correctly. So he'll probably, maybe move somewhere or go back down to AAA. Um, but yeah, I think Simeon will take over at second base. The Mets are going to owe him 72 million over the next 3 years. That's going into his age 37 season. Brandon Nimmo is a little bit younger. He's going into his age 33 season. He had an OPS plus of 114 last year. So better offensively than Semien, a league average defender in left. Um, and the Rangers are going to owe him 96.25 million over the next 5 years. Um, and that'll go into 2030. Um, yeah, like I said, I think the Rangers are the big winners of this trade. They needed some outfield help. With Evan Carter, the whole Evan Carter thing got really weird. He was like a hero for them during the World Series run, and then like disappeared last year. I think there was some health stuff, and then he got sent down or something like that. Um, they've got Wyatt Langford. They DFA'd Adolis Garcia, so they needed outfield help. And I think Nimmo is going to provide a lot of help. I think he's, one of the better, um, and probably not one of the better outfielders in the league, but I think he's one of the more underrated outfielders in the league given his offensive production. Um, there was also some stuff that came out that maybe he wasn't super happy in New York. Um, Maybe some dysfunction in the clubhouse. So that could have been part of this trade too. But it seems like a wild trade for the Mets to make because Semien is getting older. Um, there have been like some injury concerns throughout his career to begin with. I just don't think he's worth 72 million at this point in his career.
Yeah, the Mets are just reckless as an organization. They've, especially with not making the playoffs last year, with having that big of a payroll, I think that raised a lot of pressure in the front office to do something this offseason and really make that team better. But at the same time, they got rid of one of their best hitters that isn't named Francisco Lindor, and Pete Alonso might not be coming back for them, and I'm thinking of other guys on the Mets team that, Juan Soto, of course, but Juan Soto is Juan Soto. He's not worth the $765 million, and I will die on that hill. Um, but anyway, yeah, they give up a really good hitter in Brandon Nimmo, and like you said, he's one of the more underappreciated players and outfielders in the game. Now it looks like the Rangers, considering Semien's about league average output last year, I don't think the Rangers are going to miss him that much. They they have Josh Smith and Ezekiel Duran who can come in and play second base as a platoon. So Josh Smith is a lefty and Ezekiel Duran is a righty. Now, Josh Smith is a much better hitter than Ezekiel Duran is. Smith put up about like a 90 OPS last year, and Duran was a little bit lower. His OPS was in the 500s, but Duran's kind of a defense first type of guy. So, and this kind of opens up a little bit of areas for the Rangers to maybe go for a cheaper option externally at second base as opposed to paying Marcus Semien $30 million dollars a year to until his age 38 season to, you know, be there to block second base for somebody else. So I didn't do a deep dive into the Rangers farm system or anything to see who's coming up this year, but that looks to be their options at the moment. I looked at their 40-man roster, so um, but yeah, that's all I got on the Brandon Nimmo trade. So let's move on to Taylor Ward for Grayson Rodriguez.
Yeah, this one is I think the last one, the Simeon for Nimmo trade, makes sense for the Rangers. I think the Mets, you know, kind of did it because Marcus Semien is a name in the league. This one I don't think makes any sense. The Orioles are really hurting for quality starting pitching. That was something that really hurt them last year. They lost Corbin Burns. I honestly don't know if I could. Uh, Sugano is like the only starting pitcher I can name.
Trevor
Um,
Trevor Rogers is extremely
Trevor
good.
Rogers. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Trevor
he's gonna
Rogers.
be a beast.
Yeah. He was good last year, but other than Trevor Rogers, it was a pretty mid rotation for them last year at best. Um, and you're trading away Grayson Rodriguez, who is a proven quality starting pitcher when he's healthy. He was hurt last year, but um, when he's healthy, he's a really good pitcher. Um, and they gave that up for, I believe he had 3 years left on his contract, and they gave that up for 1 year of Taylor Ward. Now, Taylor Ward is coming off a career year. He had 30 plus home runs for the Angels. I'm not sure where the OPS plus finished, but I'm sure it was above league average. Um, but I looked at the advanced metrics a little bit, and he may have overperformed last year. When you look at some of his like barrel percent numbers and things like that. So, I just don't know what the Orioles were thinking when they made this trade. I mean, I know that, they're struggling in the outfield, and that they're kind of hurting for a power hitter after the Gunnar Henderson down year last year and Adley, whatever is going on with Adley Rutschman. They're sort of hurting for some pop in that lineup, but they're also hurting for starting pitching. And I think Grayson Rodriguez is probably going to provide more value to your team when healthy than Taylor Ward will, especially given where the contracts stand. And I guess the Orioles didn't see it that way. They might, that's an ownership group that now, in the past, they weren't spending, but the new ownership group seems to be more willing to spend. So they might feel that they can go out there and sign some starting pitching, and that they don't really need Grayson Rodriguez. They feel that his health is too much a liability or something like that. But if they don't go out and sign starting pitching and get some starting pitching help, this trade really makes no sense to me at all.
Yeah, my only thought on this is that the Orioles had some kind of inside information on Grayson Rodriguez's progression back to pitching and how he was doing in his recovery and his pitch shapes and velocity and stuff. That's the only thing that I could think of is that he wasn't nearly where the Orioles wanted him to be. So they didn't really want to waste their time and they wanted an immediate bat to
Hmm.
replace, because Tyler O'Neill uh was hurt last season. I don't know what's going on with Tyler O'Neill this year, but I assume that he's a free agent. Um, but Heston Kjerstad was very disappointing. He was supposed to be their left fielder, and he was well below league average last year. Um, and yeah, I don't know. I just see this as a way of the Orioles trying to take advantage of the Angels for trying to get like a big name in pitching and get a lucrative deal. So I don't know. We'll have to see how it plays out, but I don't really like on the flip side, I don't really like the Angels pitching development whatsoever. They don't have a good track record in signing pitchers in free agency and developing pitchers. They're not very well known for that either. I'm trying to think of who their that pitcher is for them. Um, Dominican guy throws like a 99-mile-an-hour sinker, starting pitcher. I can't think of his name right now, but
Yeah,
he
Yimi Garcia, or is he out of the
no, he's a
bullpen more?
starting pitcher. But anyway, I wish that I could remember his name, but he has very, very good stuff, and he carved the Guardians up in a couple starts. But his stats were just not that good. He had like a 5 ERA or something last year. Um,
Is it Jose
so
Soriano? Is that who
Jose
you're thinking of?
Soriano, yeah, that's the
Yeah.
guy. He's disgusting, but the Angels just can't really seem to put it together when it comes to his pitching development.
Mhm.
So I don't know. Those are my thoughts on it. Let's move on to the Ryan Helsley Orioles signing, keeping it in Baltimore.
Yeah. This one, I think, I think it makes of the three that we've talked about, this makes the most sense to me. Helsley struggled pretty badly last year. He led the MLB in saves in 2024, though. He had an ERA of 4.50 for the season. And his ERA really jumped once he got traded to the Mets at the deadline. I think he had a 3 ERA in St. Louis, and then it jumped to like a 7.2 in New York. His walks per nine increased and his strikeouts per nine decreased last year. Um, I'm wondering if New York could have been the root of his problems, either, their pitching philosophy. He was a closer in St. Louis. Um, in New York, of course, they had Edwin Diaz closing, so he became like a setup guy, or he was even pitching in the sixth inning some. So I'm wondering if that bothered him a little bit, if the way the Mets call pitches or scout or tell pitchers to throw certain mixes. I'm wondering if that hurt him, or it could have just been large market pressure. New York is a much bigger market than St. Louis. The spotlight is a lot brighter, especially given the way the Cardinals have performed as a ball club in recent years. So, that could have been part of the pressure too. Baltimore is a smaller spotlight, so maybe that'll help him. There's some buzz that he might try and convert to a starter this offseason, which I don't put a lot of stock in.
Yeah, I don't love that.
You don't see many guys go from being a closer to a starter. It's typically the other way around. If they're going to convert to a starter out of the bullpen, they're typically already a long relief guy or a middle innings guy. So I don't know how much stock I put in that, but that is something that people have talked about. He did add a cutter last year, so now he has a four pitch mix. So I mean, if you want to try and be a starter, the more pitches you have, the better, I guess. And like we just said, the Orioles do need starting pitching help. So maybe they signed him to try to be a starter. I mean, if he does end up being a starter for them and it works out, they got him for 28 million for 2 years. That's bargain bin for a starter these days. Um, and if they don't get a starter, they got a guy who has the potential and has shown he can be an elite closer in baseball, for $28 million, which is also a pretty good signing too. So I think this works out well for the Orioles if he can find his 2024 form.
Yeah, the whole converting a closer to starting pitcher idea kind of scares me because you saw what happened with Jordan Hicks. He was one
Right.
of the best closers in baseball, and then he converted to. Yeah, I'm not saying that he ruined it for everybody per se. He's his own person, but at the same time, this is a trend that kind of happens throughout the MLB, and Jordan Hicks, I think, is a really good example of it. Um, but he's able to throw 104, 105 miles an hour, and all of a sudden he was sitting at 98, 99 because he can't sustain 104 to 105 over 100 pitches.
Right.
So, and once they're throwing a little bit slower, they're much more hittable.
Yep.
And with Helsley, it does help a little bit since he does have a four pitch mix, but it's a question of, there was an article I saw that Helsley was tipping his pitches. I don't know how legitimate that is, but that could definitely explain the sudden jump in ERA and all of his metrics once he got to New York. But um, yeah, I just think that maybe his four pitch mix also played into his sudden jump that maybe it just wasn't working for him. And as a starter, I feel like that would kind of add fuel to the fire of like, his not his downfall as a player, but it wouldn't help his case. Um, but I do think, 2 years, $28 million is a fair price. Um, the Orioles don't have a great track record with relievers recently, which also kind of scares me. Craig Kimbrell is a good example of this. And this wasn't really the Orioles' fault, but Felix Bautista was hurt last year, and Yennier Cano was supposed to be a guy that was going to eventually be their closer, and he had a pretty rough year last year. So um, I'll have to wait and see how it looks, but um, I think this is a pretty fair price for a closer of Ryan Helsley's caliber, and he was one of the best closers in all of baseball a couple years ago. He saved 49 games in 2024. So um,
Right.
let's move on to the Sonny Gray trade.
Yeah, as a Reds fan, I like to see this, because the Cardinals were sort of the bane of my existence in the early and mid 2010s. Those Yadier Molina, Albert Pujols teams always seem to be the thorn in our side. So to see the Cardinals kind of go into a rebuild is pretty enjoyable for me to watch. They're just shedding payroll and players at this point. They are in full rebuild mode, it looks like. Um, Helsley's gone, Sonny Gray is gone. Jordan Hicks was a Cardinal. He's gone. Nolan Arenado is probably going to be gone by the time the offseason is over. There have been trade rumors floating around Nolan Arenado for a long time, and he's owed a lot of money by the Cardinals, and I'm sure they want to shed that contract. Um, and it's kind of like the Mason Wynn and Jordan Walker show in St. Louis right now, and neither of those guys are. Mason Wynn, I think, um, has the potential to be a good player. Jordan Walker, I think he's going to be like one of those prospects that never really worked out. Um, the Cardinals they're just going into rebuild mode, and this is another side effect of that. It's a really good trade for the Red Sox. They lost a couple, pitching prospects, guys who weren't really much um, of an impact player in their organization. So they didn't give up much to get a proven starting pitcher and a veteran presence. Sonny Gray will help the young guys in that Boston rotation immensely, I would think. Guys like Brian Bayo, I think will benefit quite a bit from a veteran guy like Sonny Gray in that rotation, and he'll slot in really nicely as like a 3 or 4 starter behind Crochet and Bayo in that rotation. He also came out with some quotes after the trade that made it seem like he really hates the Yankees and really hated his time there. So, if nothing else, it's good for the rivalry.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the biggest thing that the Cardinals could take away from this trade is the fact that they offloaded his contract fully to
Right.
the Red Sox. Um, the Cardinals in return, they didn't get guys that have that high of a ceiling. They got a back of the rotation starter, and they also got a pitching prospect who was a number five in the Cardinals system at the time. And I don't believe the Cardinals have that good of a farm system. So
Mhm.
I was looking at Brandon Clark's stats. He's the prospect that they got. And he had a 4 ERA in the minors last year. He didn't really stick out to me that much, but you never know with prospects. So, um, but yeah, I think this can potentially be a win for both sides because the Cardinals open up a little bit of extra money to spend. But at the same time, the Cardinals aren't really a team that necessarily struggles financially. So.
Mhm.
But also the Cardinals aren't the storied organization that they used to be. So it
Yeah.
kind of makes me question is this just another misinformed move by the Cardinals to set their organization back farther, or is this going to be good for them in the long run? And only time will tell, I guess. So next we have Devin Williams to the Mets, which we already talked a little bit about.
Yeah, I think, we both agree that this is a pretty big overpay. It's 51 million over 3 years. I think there is also some deferred money in there. Um, I'm not entirely sure what the terms are of that, but the Mets just throw money at things. It hasn't worked for them um, for quite a while now, but I guess they don't see any reason to stop, and I mean, why would you? Um, Devin Williams, like Ryan Helsley, is a guy who has the potential to be the best closer in baseball. Um, we saw it with the Brewers, but last year was really pretty bad when he got to New York. Um, he had nearly a 5 ERA. He allowed a barrel percent 2 points higher than league average. So it was not a good Devin Williams year. He figured it out a little bit down the stretch. But it was so bad that the Yankees had to trade for like 3 closers at the deadline to shore up their bullpen. Um, it'll be interesting to there was some talk, or are the lights too bright in New York for Devin Williams, and he's staying in New York, so it'll be interesting to see how that works out for him. I think it's also, what does this mean for Edwin Diaz, who's a free agent, because the Mets were talking about bringing him back, but now, they went and signed a closer. So does that mean they're not going to pursue Diaz, or does that mean they bring Diaz back and Williams closes and Diaz is your setup man, or does Williams set up for Diaz? I think that'll be interesting to see as well if they bring Edwin Diaz back, of course.
Yeah, I don't know if you can have Devin Williams closing games in New York and feel comfortable with it. You might have
Right.
to, if you're the Mets, I could definitely see them bringing back Edwin Diaz to close games, even if Edwin Diaz, as he's getting older, he probably doesn't have as high of a ceiling as Devin Williams does at this point. But Edwin Diaz has a much more consistent track record of being a reliable closer in New York and stuff. So
Mhm.
um, I don't know. I think it could go either way with the Mets sign or keeping or not keeping Edwin Diaz. There was an article that came out where this is kind of interesting. So Devin Williams was kind of blaming the Yankees for changing his delivery and messing with his mechanics and stuff, which can explain why he was so bad when he went over to New York all of a sudden. But I could also see it being as a way to kind of shift the narrative of him not being compatible with the big market team because that's the narrative right now is that the lights are too bright in New York and he kind of has a even in Milwaukee he has a track record of choking in big situations. So I don't know. I think it'll be very interesting to see how this season plays out and how Devin Williams fares staying in New York. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm skeptical of it at this point.
I think too, I mean, this is a big contract for a reliever. Um, I think it'll be interesting to see, and this is a guy that, like we said, had a down year last year, 5 ERA, um, nearly 5 ERA. It'll be interesting to see, what do guys like Edwin Diaz and Robert Suarez command as far as money goes in this market. Or, because if Diaz doesn't get a deal close to this is an insane overpay by the Mets. I mean, if they could have kept Edwin Diaz for, 3 years, if let's say Diaz signs for 3 years, 40 million or something like that, or 45 million, I think any baseball fan, I think, would take that contract as opposed to the Devin Williams one that he just signed. I mean, the Reds got a 30 plus save guy for 20 million for 2 years. Um, so, it'll be interesting to see where other contracts end up and how much of an overpay this really does end up being for the Mets.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about the resume you build as a
Hmm.
closer. If you have one stratospheric season, then you're gonna be that's gonna stick with you, even though reliever seasons are so inconsistent. If your
Right.
name's not Mariano Rivera or something. Like if Emmanuel Clase hadn't gambled his career away, then I think that Emmanuel Clase would have probably gotten a more lucrative contract than what Devin Williams got in free agency. Um, so I just think and Emilio Pagan hasn't really had that stratospheric season on his resume. So I think that could be explained why Emilio Pagan, despite having better stats than both Ryan Helsley and Devin Williams, I think that that could be why Emilio Pagan didn't get as big of a contract this year.
Right.
But let's move on to another big contract though signed, the biggest contract of this offseason to my belief, Dylan Cease to the Blue Jays.
Yeah. So this is, this is sort of where we're at as far as starting pitching goes. You pay a lot for starting pitching these days in the free agent market. And the Blue Jays did just that. Dylan Cease is a very interesting pitcher. He gets a ton of strikeouts, but the ERA really has not been there in recent years. It doesn't match what you're seeing as far as like K per nine and his strike where his strikeout total ends up. Um, Walks tend to be an issue for him, and he allows a lot of balls in the air. So that's why uh, when you walk guys and then give up balls in the air, you're giving up home runs that typically are 2 or 3 run shots as opposed to solo shots. And you can't really work your way out of that with strikeouts. So that's where a lot of the trouble lies with him. Now, his FIP was a full point lower than his ERA last year, so it's possible that he got hurt a little bit by his defense. San Diego, they don't play insane defense. I don't think, they don't strike me as like an insane defensive team. The Blue Jays, however, do have one of the best defenses in baseball. They might be the best defensive team in baseball. Um, so that might help him potentially. And I think the thing with this deal is um, the Blue Jays give him a frontline starter deal, knowing that they just have to find a way to help him be that frontline starter because he has the potential to do it. You saw it in Chicago. He had a year where he had like a 2.2 ERA over, I think, like 180 innings. Um, and so it's in there. He's still relatively young. Um, so, it's possible that the Blue Jays feel that whatever it is with the advanced metrics or his pitch shape or his pitch mix, they feel that they can help him limit walks and get that ERA down. But that's the only reason I think you could justify giving him this much money is that you think you know something that other teams don't when it comes to Dylan Cease.
I have his Savant profile pulled up here, and I don't think that the defense plays as big of a role as a lot of other starters it
Mm,
would. He's 95th percentile in whiff percentage. He's 89th percentile in strikeout percentage. He had 215 strikeouts last year. Now, something that he does have going for him is being an extremely reliable starter. He's
right.
started 30 plus games the last, to my knowledge, 4 plus years of his career. Yeah, dating back to 2023, he started 33 games, 33 games in 24. He started 32 games last year, so he's a workhorse. He stays very healthy. He strikes out 200 plus batters a season. Um, his walk rate was the only thing that I think hurt him last year as opposed to different years. I think that that's the most that could be attributed to it because his his ground ball percentage is he's 24th percentile in ground ball percentage. So he gives up a lot of fly balls. A lot of those fly balls leave the yard. And when you're walking guys, having guys already on base and then giving up a lot of home runs, it's kind of the same situation as Tanner Bybee. Tanner Bybee has such a high ceiling as a pitcher, but he hurt himself, and I think that's a lot of what happened to Dylan Cease last year. But Dylan Cease is a little bit different of a situation than Tanner Bybee because Dylan Cease is a frontline starter on. He has the potential to be a frontline starter on any team, whereas Tanner
Right.
Bybee is an ace on maybe 5 or 10 teams in the MLB. Um, but yeah, this is the Blue Jays have a very scary rotation next year, nonetheless. The Blue Jays were really the last team that I expected to be looking for starting pitching this season. As you know, the Guardians are a team that doesn't need starting pitching. I don't think it's going to go for starting pitching, but as far as like a larger market team goes, I did not expect the Blue Jays to go for this large of a deal for a starting pitcher when that is already a strike that they have. But I wrote out the Blue Jays potential starting rotation next year. I know it's kind of all over social media, so you've probably already heard it at this point, but Kevin Gossman, Shane Bieber, Jose Barrios, Dylan Cease, and Trey Savage, that's their 1 through 5, and really no particular order, but I think Kevin Gossman is going to be their ace next year. And then they have three other guys who really four other guys who can be like a solid number two pitcher on any other team. So they don't have a weak link in their starting rotation. And that's not to mention Eric Lauer, who could be a spot starter for them. There's a couple of other guys in their system that I think are exciting and can be starting pitchers and kind of plug those holes in there. So um, yeah, that's all I have on the Dylan C signing. And if you have nothing else, Jaden, I think that's where we're gonna leave off for the week. So um,
Yeah, no, I don't have anything else.
yeah, yeah, thank you so much for listening. And we will don't forget to rate and review, leave 5 stars on Spotify, leave a like on YouTube, subscribe, and leave a comment down below and tell us what you thought of one of the off-season signings and the Guardians and Red signings and stuff. So with that, we'll talk to you in episode 42.
Yep, thank you.